And the UN has warned of another human rights catastrophe in Sudan after declaring that October's siege of El-Fasher by RSF rebels bore the hallmarks of genocide. The United Nations now says the same warning signs are appearing in the strategically important city of El-Obeid. 500,000 people there have been cut off from food, water and medical supplies and face drone strikes and sexual violence. Mariel Müller takes a look at what is fast becoming Sudan's next flashpoint. You may find parts of her report distressing.
The world was warned a massacre was coming in Sudan. It happened in El-Fasher. Now those same warning signs are appearing again. That's footage from a new flashpoint in the war in Sudan, El-Obeid.
This is not a drill. It is a red alert that needs to land on the desks of heads of state and government around the world.
I've reported from the front lines of the conflict in Sudan. I spoke with people who suffered the most unimaginable human cruelty. A woman held as a sex slave, health workers who watched their colleagues being killed in a hospital. And I've seen what happens when the world looks away. That's why this warning matters. Last year, the city of El-Fasher fell to the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. It ended in a massacre, as their fighters went door to door, executing people, torturing and raping them, forcing others into sexual slavery. Civilians who tried to flee ran straight into trenches built to trap them. Hundreds were executed. In just 3 days, more than 6,000 people were killed. The UN says it bore the hallmarks of genocide. The RSF denies the accusations, though UN investigators say the evidence is overwhelming. Now the UN warns the same playbook can be seen in El-Obeid, a city home to 500,000 people. Just like in El-Fasher, the RSF has spent months cutting off access to food, water and medical supplies. Residents in El-Obeid who don't want to be identified have told us about what's happening on the ground. One said, "We were under constant threat, besieged in our homes. The army has now recaptured some areas." And another one said, "Basic goods are hard to come by. Prices have skyrocketed and we have daily power cuts. People are suffering. There's not enough drinking water."
Drone attacks during the day and sexual violence at night have left no safe window for women and girls to collect water, mirroring the atrocities that were documented in El-Fasher last year.
Those drone attacks have become one of the deadliest features of the fighting around El-Obeid. In just the first 4 months of 2026, drone strikes killed at least 880 civilians, more than 80% of all civilian deaths recorded by the UN Rights Office. Sudan remains the world's largest displacement crisis and the most severe humanitarian crisis on the planet. Over 14 million people have been forced from their homes. 21 million face acute hunger. And yet the war, now in its 4th year, barely makes international headlines. For now, there's still a lifeline to El-Obeid. Humanitarian aid is trickling in, though it's far from enough. And the UN says there's still a chance to prevent El-Obeid from becoming another El-Fasher. But time is running out.
The people of Obeid are counting on you. We must not fail them.
El-Obeid is fast becoming a test of whether the international community can act on the lessons of El-Fasher. For the people living here, the stakes could hardly be higher.
Well, Cameron Hudson is an analyst and consultant on African security and governance. Welcome to DW. Do you expect this UN warning about an impending human rights catastrophe in Sudan? Do you think that'll make any difference?
No, sadly, I don't think it's going to make much of a difference right now because we've seen this before. We've seen this type of genocidal activity play out in Sudan multiple times in the last 3 years of this conflict. Obviously, we know more today about the tactics that the RSF are using, but even knowing what the likelihood of real genocidal violence is, we are not seeing the international community respond. We're not seeing the UN Security Council or involved international actors step forward and either impose consequences, threaten new consequences on the RSF, or even discuss what we used to discuss in the olden days, which was the deployment of international peacekeepers to try to interfere in this violence. We're not seeing any of those conversations happening today.
Often, though, what we have seen is those international efforts, those international military efforts, they often end disastrously. I wonder, is it true that the world has turned its back on South Sudan, or just Western governments and media? Because people will wonder, well, why aren't African nations doing more to put out this fire on their own doorstep?
Well, it's not one country or one group of countries' responsibility to respond. I think it's the international community's need to respond. We have seen countries like the United States, however, weaken, frankly, the international bodies like the UN Security Council over time. We have seen the UN Security Council become, a battleground for great powers like Russia and China, and essentially get tied up in knots. And so it's not devoting the kind of time or attention or resources to lesser conflicts like the one in Sudan. Similarly, I think the African Union is not paying much attention to what's going on in Sudan because so many African Union members are in fact involved in some way in the fighting in Sudan, whether benefiting financially from the illicit activities going on in the war economy in Sudan or contributing fighters to the conflict. So you're seeing both at an international level and a regional level, I think a lot of distraction and a lot of mixed messages coming about what should be done to end the conflict in Sudan.
We've heard some terrible things, not just in the report just now, but in the reporting on this 4-year-long conflict, cutting off access to food, water and medical supplies, fighters going door to door, executing people and torturing and raping them. Why is it that civilians in this war seem to have borne such a heavy cost?
Well, I think two reasons. One is the fact that the international community is not imposing any consequences or accountability on the perpetrators of this violence. So they know that they can carry out these crimes with no consequences. And then I think secondly, we're seeing a change in the technology being used on the battlefield. So an increasing reliance upon drones in this conflict have really put civilians on the front lines of the conflict in a way that they weren't before when this was a street battle happening, between the two armies on a more conventional way. We're seeing now the use of drones, the reliance on drones, creating a much higher civilian casualty.
How does rape and starvation of civilians, how does that benefit either side militarily? You sort of hear these horrific things going on and you think, well, how does that advance your war aims?
Well, I think what it does is it terrorizes the civilian population. And certainly for the rapid support forces, this has been one of the key aspects and one of the key tactics that they have used to pacify populations under their control. Rather than trying to provide any kind of governance to these areas, they have pacified them through essentially terrorism. And so we have seen that time and again over the course of this war. I think from the Army's perspective, they have used the withholding of humanitarian assistance as a way to punish populations that have not sided with the army or who have shown loyalty to the rapid support forces. But either way, I think both sides have been able to get away with this kind of behavior because of the lack of accountability coming from the international community.
OK, so now the UN is warning about the situation in El-Obeid. Tell us more about that city and what it is about it that means fighting there is likely to be particularly fierce.
Well, El-Obeid is located close to the sort of geographic center of the country, making it a crossroads, quite a strategic crossroads for anyone who controls it. So the Rapid Support Forces is trying to gain control of it because it will open up a main road into the capital, Khartoum, which would allow them to try to regain control of the political capital of the country and essentially regain the upper hand in the conflict. For the army, it is a crossroads leading into Darfur, the last area under the control of the Rapid Support Forces, which, if it was able to go into Darfur through El-Obeid, it would put the Rapid Support Forces on their back foot and essentially create the opportunity for the army to retake control over the entire country. So it is a strategic crossroads. It is also a commercial center, the center of the gum Arabic trade, of much of the agricultural trade. So there's a lot of money moving in and out of El-Obeid as well. So it's highly strategic for both political and economic reasons.
Good talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us, Cameron. Cameron Hudson.